Just after midnight, on January 14th, 1942, a German submarine surfaced in the shipping lanes south of Long Island, and her captain climbed to the bridge to look at something no enemy officer had ever seen: America, with the lights still on. 5 weeks into the war, and the coast hadn't dimmed a bulb. Streetlights ran the length of Long Island. Headlights moved along the shore roads. In the distance, the Ferris wheel at Coney Island glowed against the winter dark. The captain's name was Reinhard Hartigan. He was 28 years old, and he had found his way across the Atlantic to this exact spot using dead reckoning, because every one of those lights was doing his work for him. The night before, a tanker called the Doenitz had passed between his periscope and that glowing shoreline, silhouetted like a paper target. He sank her. Within a day, he sank another, the Coimbra, so close to the beach that people in the Hamptons watched the fireball from their windows. This was the opening of Operation Drumbeat, the moment Nazi Germany discovered that the east coast of the United States was the softest target of the entire war. Over the next 18 months, German U-boats would sink thousands of Allied ships and bring Britain closer to collapse than the Luftwaffe ever managed. And then, in the spring of 1943, the whole campaign fell apart with a speed nobody on either side thought possible. A quarter of Germany's entire operational U-boat force destroyed in 31 days. The story of how that happened is usually told as a story about code breakers, and they earned their place in it. But the deeper answer lies somewhere stranger, inside the U-boat fleet's own design, in the invisible thread that held it together. Because the thing that made the wolfpacks deadly, and the thing that eventually killed them, turned out to be the same thing. It starts with a man nobody in Berlin wanted to listen to. Karl Doenitz ran Germany's submarine arm, and through the late 1930s, he made the same argument to anyone who would sit still for it. Forget the battleships. Give him 300 medium submarines and he could sink 1 million tons of shipping a month, enough to starve Britain out of the war inside a year. His superiors heard him out and built battleships anyway. Ships like the Bismarck were glamorous, and glamour is persuasive. So when the war began in September 1939, Doenitz had 57 U-boats, and fewer than half of them could operate in the open Atlantic. The battleships went on to fail almost exactly the way he'd predicted. The Admiral Scheer caught a convoy in November 1940 and sank 5 ships in an afternoon, then spent months fleeing the Royal Navy. The Bismarck destroyed the battlecruiser HMS Hood in minutes and was hunted down and sunk within days. A surface raider was enormous, visible, and tied to friendly ports that kept disappearing. By the end of the war, Germany's whole surface fleet would account for roughly 930,000 tons of Allied shipping. The U-boats sank around 14 million. Doenitz's real opportunity came in the summer of 1940, and it came from the fall of France, close enough to reach convoys before the Royal Navy had even finished forming their escorts. 270 ships went down between June and October 1940, and it was here that Doenitz perfected the tactic that made the U-boat famous: the wolfpack. A single boat would find a convoy and radio its position back to headquarters. Headquarters would vector in every submarine within reach, and the pack would strike together at night on the surface, where Allied sonar, which only listened underwater, was worthless. The entire system ran on radio, dozens of transmissions, every night, flowing between the boats and headquarters. In 1940, that chatter was the wolfpack's greatest strength. Nobody in Germany had yet imagined what else it might become. Britain's defense was the convoy, and the logic behind it was sound. 50 ships traveling together were easier to protect than 2 groups of 25, and harder to find in an ocean that, from a submarine's low bridge, might as well be infinite. What Britain lacked was the hardware. There weren't enough destroyers, and no escort could fix the worst gap of all: a stretch of mid-ocean beyond the range of any land-based aircraft, where U-boats could surface, run at 17 knots, and hunt untouched. The sailors who had to cross it called it the Black Pit. In March 1941, 3 of Germany's most celebrated aces were lost in 14 days. Gunther Prinn, who had slipped into the Royal Navy's home anchorage and sunk a battleship at her moorings, vanished on patrol. Joachim Schepke died when his boat was rammed. Otto Kretschmer, the highest-scoring commander of the entire war, was captured with his crew, and the campaign barely noticed. Doenitz moved his patrol lines farther west, and the tonnage kept sinking. Then came Pearl Harbor. Germany declared war on the United States, and Doenitz sent 5 long-range boats west to test the American coast. One of them was U-123. What the Germans found in January 1942 was a country that had spent 2 years watching Britain fight this exact war and absorbed none of it. No blackout, no convoys, merchant ships steaming alone with their running lights burning. The American commander, Admiral Ernest King, had his reasons. Destroyers were scarce, and troop transports seemed the higher priority, and each reason was defensible on its own. Together, they added up to a slaughter. The first wave of U-boats went home in February without a single loss, and the boats that followed turned the American seaboard into a shooting gallery. Vacationers watched tankers burn from beachfront hotels. Oil came ashore on Florida sand. Some U-boat crews grew confident enough to surface and finish their targets with the deck gun, saving the torpedoes for later. Across roughly 7 months, the toll in American waters ran into the hundreds of ships. It took until May 1942 for coastal convoys to finally form up, and the change was immediate. 7 U-boats destroyed within weeks. By July, Doenitz had pulled his boats out of American waters altogether, having taught the U.S. Navy an expensive rule it would never forget. An unescorted merchant ship in U-boat waters isn't sailing, it's advertising. So the war returned to the North Atlantic, and through the second half of 1942, it turned into the Allies' darkest arithmetic. For every U-boat they managed to kill, roughly 10 merchant ships went down, 56 of them in October alone, most swallowed by the Black Pit. Behind that lopsided ratio sat an intelligence catastrophe. German codebreakers had cracked British naval cipher number 3 and were reading about 80% of the Admiralty's convoy traffic. Doenitz often knew a convoy's route before its own escorts did, and in February 1942, the German Navy had added a 4th rotor to its Enigma machines, locking the British codebreakers at Bletchley Park out of U-boat traffic for 10 straight months. One side could see the whole board. The other was playing blindfolded. The way back began with 3 sailors and a sinking submarine. On October 30th, 1942, in the eastern Mediterranean, British warships forced U-559 to the surface, and her crew abandoned her without finishing the job of destroying her secrets. From the destroyer HMS Petard, 3 men swam across. Lieutenant Tony Fasten and able seaman Colin Grazier climbed down into the flooding hull in the dark and began passing codebooks up through the hatch. The documents made it out. The 2 men didn't. The boat went down with them still inside. Both received the George Cross, and the papers they died for put Bletchley Park back inside German naval traffic by December, reading U-boat patrol positions faster than the boats could move between them. The wolfpack's own voice began to betray it. Allied escorts were being fitted with high-frequency direction finding. The sailors called it Huff Duff, a device that could take a bearing on a radio transmission the instant it went out, and a wolfpack could not function without transmitting. The moment a U-boat reported a convoy, it handed the escorts its own position. Doenitz never found a way around it, because there wasn't one. Without the radio, there was no wolfpack. Finding the boats was only half the fight. For years, the actual killing tool had been the depth charge, rolled off a ship's stern, which meant the attacker lost sonar contact in the last seconds of every attack. Exactly the window a good U-boat captain needed to twist away. The answer wasn't a bigger bomb, but a different geometry. A mortar called Hedgehog that threw 24 contact-fused charges ahead of the ship while the target still sat in the sonar beam. The charges exploded only if they hit. The hunter never lost the picture, and the next attack lined up immediately. Darkness had been the other refuge, and the British took that too. Early radar lost a surfaced U-boat inside a mile, so an officer named Humphrey DeVerd Lee proposed something ruthless in its simplicity: mount a searchlight on a radar-equipped bomber. The aircraft would close in total blackness, engines lost in the wind, and then the light would snap on, leaving the men on the conning tower roughly 25 seconds before the depth charges arrived. The first kill came in July 1942, and U-boat crews learned to dread the Lee light above almost anything else the Allies fielded, because it was invisible right up until the moment it wasn't. Surfacing at night to recharge batteries, safe practice for years, had become a way to die without warning. By the spring of 1943, all of it was converging. The decrypts, Huff Duff, Hedgehog, the Lee light, new escort carriers, and at last enough ships and aircraft to use them. But the darkest hour came first. In the opening 3 weeks of March 1943, around 120 Allied ships went down that the British Admiralty privately questioned whether the convoy system could survive at all. They couldn't know it yet, but the U-boat force was already finished. The proof came at the end of April, around a slow convoy called ONS-5. 43 merchant ships, with a wolfpack of roughly 30 U-boats gathered across their path. The battle cost the convoy 13 ships. It cost Doenitz 6 submarines. Midway through, a storm scattered the merchantmen across the ocean, and instead, the survivors limped into range of land-based air cover before the pack could finish them. 2 weeks later, Convoy SC-130 crossed the Atlantic without losing a single ship and killed at least 3 more U-boats on the way. One of them, U-954, went down with all hands, and among the dead was a 21-year-old junior officer named Peter Doenitz. The admiral's son, Carl Doenitz, did the arithmetic himself, withdrew his boats from the North Atlantic routes, and wrote a sentence that reads like a surrender delivered 2 years early. We had lost the Battle of the Atlantic. May 1943 went into the record as Black May. 43 U-boats destroyed, a quarter of the entire operational force, in 31 days. No single weapon had done it. American escort carriers like the Bogue, the Card, and the Santee had stopped waiting to be attacked and gone hunting down Huff Duff Bearings, trading 1 lost merchant ship for 17 dead U-boats. 60 very long-range Liberator bombers had moved to the Atlantic on President Roosevelt's direct order. A new centimetric radar, small enough for a patrol plane and sharp enough to catch a periscope wake, had reached Allied aircraft, while German warning receivers stayed completely deaf to it, which meant U-boats running surfaced at night spent months advertising themselves to aircraft they couldn't detect. Brazil, dragged into the war when U-boats began sinking her ships off her own coast, helped put 11 Axis submarines on the bottom of the South Atlantic, ran the factor Doenitz could never shoot at, American industry, launching 2,710 Liberty ships by war's end. He needed to sink 700,000 tons a month just to keep pace with that. In November 1942, and after Black May, his monthly totals collapsed to less than a tenth of that figure, never to recover. The boats kept fighting for 2 more years, but the fight had become a subtraction problem running in one direction. Germany introduced an acoustic torpedo that homed on propeller noise. It killed several escorts in its debut, and within weeks, the Allies were towing a simple noisemaker decoy that reduced it to dead weight. The autumn wolfpacks of 1943 sank 8 merchant ships and 6 escorts and paid 39 U-boats for the privilege. And by November, even Doenitz conceded the tactic was dead. The Type 21, a revolutionary design with the battery power to fight, submerged the way submarines were always meant to, arrived too late. Its construction wrecked by bombing and shortages. Exactly 1 completed a war patrol. It never fired a shot. By June 1944, the outcome had been settled for a year. Every soldier and every crate of ammunition, stockpiled in Britain for D-Day, had crossed an Atlantic made safe enough to plan around. When the landings came, 36 U-boats sorted against the invasion, reinforced by 7 more, and out of 5,339 Allied vessels, they sank 8, losing 13 of their own. On May 7, 1945, 1 day before Germany's surrender, an RAF flying boat sank U-320, the last U-boat lost in action. 783 U-boats destroyed, against some 3,500 merchant ships and 175 warships. 72,000 Allied sailors and merchant seamen were dead, and of the 40,000 men Germany sent to sea in U-boats, 3 out of 4 never came home. The highest casualty rate of any service arm on any side in the entire war. Churchill admitted afterward that the U-boat was the only thing that ever truly frightened him, more than the Blitz, more than invasion, because it was the one campaign where defeat meant Britain stopped being able to eat. It never happened. More than 99% of every ship that sailed to or from Britain got through against the deadliest weapon Germany ever put to sea, a force that could not attack without speaking, facing an enemy that learned to hear everything. Doenitz had promised he could starve an empire back when nobody in Berlin was listening. He was almost right. The Allies spent 3.5 brutal years making sure almost was the only word he got to keep.